Mia never expected to find a dead baby in her roommate Jessie's laundry basket. But there it was, tiny, lifeless, and silent. The moment Mia's eyes met the small, pale body, everything she thought she knew about her roommate shattered. Jessie had always been quiet, secretive even, but this was beyond anything Mia could have imagined. What had happened to that baby? And what was Jessie hiding? As the police closed in, Mia realized the truth was far darker than she ever could have guessed. It was a quiet Tuesday morning when Mia returned to her apartment after a long day of lectures and studying at the university. She had been looking forward to a few hours of rest, but as she opened the door to the shared apartment, she was greeted by an odd, almost unsettling smell. It wasn't overpowering, but it was a strange mix of detergent, something faintly sour, and an underlying mustiness that Mia couldn't quite place. The kind of smell that seemed out of place in an otherwise clean apartment. She glanced around, noticing the usual clutter in the living room, shoes strewn haphazardly by the door, empty coffee cups on the table, and the faint hum of the refrigerator. Nothing unusual. Her roommate Jessie wasn't home, as usual, and Mia found herself grateful for the quiet. She made her way to the kitchen to grab a drink of water, but as she passed by the laundry area, her eyes were drawn to the laundry basket near the door. It was an old, woven basket that Jessie always used to collect clothes, and it was positioned a little too carelessly for Mia's liking. At first, Mia didn't think much of it. After all, it wasn't uncommon for Jessie to leave the laundry basket around the apartment. But today, something about the basket caught her attention. It was lying on its side, one of its corners crushed against the wall, and several pieces of clothing were spilling out. Mia paused, her eyes scanning the pile of clothes strewn on the floor. Her first instinct was to bend down and pick them up. That's when she saw it. A small, curled bundle lay nestled among the clothes. At first glance, it appeared to be a stuffed doll, perhaps one of the plush toys Jessie had bought for her niece. But as Mia crouched closer, something wasn't right. The bundle didn't have the softness she expected from a stuffed animal. It was heavier, denser, and it seemed too still, too lifeless. The hair on the back of Mia's neck stood up, her breath caught in her throat, and she instinctively reached out to touch it. When she pulled the bundle toward her, she could feel the coldness of its weight, the strange chill that seemed to seep through her fingertips. The clothes that covered it shifted, revealing small, pale hands. Her heart skipped a beat, a sickening realization crawling up her spine. It wasn't a doll. It was a baby. Mia froze, her blood running cold. She stared at the baby's tiny face, its closed eyes, the faintly bluish tint of its skin, and felt a wave of nausea wash over her. The air in the room seemed to press in on her, the weight of the moment suffocating her. She quickly dropped the bundle back into the laundry basket, her hands trembling. The world around her started to blur, and she staggered back, her mind racing to comprehend what she had just seen. Why was a baby in her roommate's laundry basket? What happened to it? Was it really dead? Or had something gone horribly wrong? Mia tried to steady herself, but she couldn't stop the questions that spiraled through her mind. She felt a cold sweat form on her forehead as panic took hold. Her hands shook as she fumbled for her phone, but something inside her screamed that it wasn't time to call for help yet. Something wasn't adding up, and Mia knew she needed to figure out what was going on before taking the next step. Her eyes returned to the laundry basket. The baby, once a strange discovery, now seemed to be at the center of a nightmare she had no idea how to navigate. Mia's heart raced in her chest as she stood in the living room, frozen in disbelief. The image of the tiny, lifeless baby lingered in her mind, and she couldn't shake the horror that gripped her. Every step she took felt like it led her deeper into an unbearable fog of confusion and dread. She stood there, the phone still clutched tightly in her trembling hand, unsure of what to do next. Her mind was a jumble of thoughts, none of them making sense. Her instincts told her to call the police, to get help immediately, but her body refused to move. What if she was wrong? What if it wasn't as bad as it seemed? Maybe the baby wasn't dead, just sleeping. Maybe there was some mistake, some innocent explanation. But no matter how hard Mia tried to convince herself, she couldn't escape the cold reality of what she had found. The baby hadn't moved, hadn't made a sound. Its skin was pale, its features too still, too lifeless for her to ignore. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to calm down. But the panic surged again. What was she supposed to do? She could already feel the walls of her small apartment closing in around her, each second stretching out into an eternity of uncertainty. Her mind screamed for answers that didn't come, leaving her to grapple with the suffocating silence. Mia thought back to the day. Jessie had left for work early in the morning, as she always did. They had exchanged brief pleasantries when Mia had woken up, but other than that, there had been no sign of anything unusual. Jessie was a quiet, private person, but she never seemed strange, certainly not capable of hiding something so dark, so horrifying. The idea that Jessie could have anything to do with this didn't sit right, but the evidence was undeniable. Mia's gaze drifted back to the laundry basket, her eyes locking onto the pile of clothes that surrounded the baby. The clothes were neat, folded in a way that suggested they had been carefully arranged. Nothing about the situation seemed chaotic or hurried. The whole scene felt wrong, too calm, too calculated. She thought about calling 911, but something tugged at her. What if she misunderstood? What if this wasn't what it seemed? What if the baby was still alive? Mia couldn't shake that thought, a faint hope that perhaps there was still a chance to save the child. Her hand reached out again, but before she could touch the bundle, something made her hesitate. She looked at the baby again, really looked at it, and her stomach turned. It wasn't just the baby's lifelessness that disturbed her, it was the lack of any other sign. No signs of a struggle, no indication that anyone had been around to take care of it. No crying, no warmth. Her thoughts raced back to Jessie. She had never mentioned anything about a baby. No one in their circle knew that Jessie had even been pregnant, let alone given birth. Mia couldn't recall ever hearing her talk about any of the usual preparations, maternity clothes, doctor's appointments, the kind of things people did when they were expecting. Jessie had always been the kind of person who kept her private life under wraps. But this was different. The uncertainty gnawed at Mia, but she knew that calling the authorities was the only logical step. She stepped back from the basket and dialed 911, her hands shaking as the phone rang. As the dispatcher's calm voice came through, Mia struggled to find her words, her mind still in a whirlwind. She explained the situation in as few words as possible, feeling a strange sense of detachment, as if the reality of it all hadn't quite hit her yet. The dispatcher promised to send help immediately, but Mia couldn't stop the flood of questions that continued to swirl in her mind. Where was Jessie? Why hadn't she come home yet? What was going on here? How could Mia have missed something so monumental happening right under her nose? As she hung up, Mia felt the weight of her decision settle in. She had done the right thing, but that didn't make the fear inside her go away. The apartment felt eerily quiet now, the tension in the air palpable. She glanced back toward the door, half expecting Jessie to walk in at any moment, but the hours passed, and there was still no sign of her. The silence was deafening, and Mia knew, deep in her bones, that nothing would ever be the same again. The weight was unbearable. Mia's heart pounded as she stood in the living room, her mind racing with an endless loop of questions. The police were on their way, but every minute felt like an eternity. She couldn't stop pacing, her feet moving restlessly across the floor, back and forth. Every so often, her eyes darted nervously toward the laundry basket, where the baby's body remained, untouched. The image of that small, pale figure haunted her, its stillness, its silence, it all felt so unnatural. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, snapping Mia out of her daze. She quickly pulled it out, her breath catching in her throat when she saw it was a text from Jessie. The message was short, barely more than a few words. Sorry, running late. Be home soon. Mia stared at it, her mind working furiously to make sense of the situation. Jessie had been running late when Mia found the baby. Could there be a connection? Had she been hiding something all along? Mia's pulse quickened as she thought about it. Jessie had always kept to herself, but she'd never been secretive to this degree. She wasn't a liar, at least not in Mia's experience. But this was different. She tried to picture her roommate, but the more Mia thought about it, the less she seemed to recognize the person she had been living with. Jessie had always been an enigma, someone who came and went without much explanation, but now, Mia couldn't help but feel there was a side of her that she had never truly known. The apartment suddenly felt suffocating. Mia looked around at the familiar surroundings, the couch where they'd watched movies together, the kitchen where they'd shared meals, the hallway that led to their separate bedrooms. All of it seemed alien now. The normalcy of their life together had been shattered. Everything felt wrong. Her mind raced in circles, trying to make sense of what had happened, but nothing added up. What kind of person could hide something like this? What could possibly lead someone to leave a dead baby in a laundry basket? Was it an accident? Or had something darker occurred? Mia couldn't shake the feeling that the answer was more sinister than she wanted to believe. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her from her thoughts. This time it was a call, an unknown number. Mia's heart skipped a beat as she answered it, her hands still shaking. "Hello," she said, her voice hoarse. The voice on the other end was calm, too calm. "Is this Mia?" "Yes," she replied, her voice trembling. "Who is this?" "This is Officer Davis. We received your 911 call, and we're on our way. Can you tell us exactly what you found?" Mia swallowed hard, trying to steady herself. She quickly recounted the discovery of the baby, her voice shaking as she described the scene. The officer listened carefully, asking a few questions, but Mia's mind was elsewhere, consumed by the thought of Jessie returning home soon. What would she say? Would she act like everything was normal? Or would she break down in front of Mia? The thought of Jessie walking through that door and seeing the police, seeing the baby, it terrified Mia. "Is there any chance you know who the baby belongs to?" Officer Davis asked. Mia felt a cold wave wash over her. "No, I don't know anything about the baby. I'd never seen it before." She had barely finished speaking when there was a soft knock at the door. Mia's breath hitched in her chest, her heart leaping into her throat. The knock was followed by a faint scraping sound, the unmistakable noise of the door opening. Mia turned slowly, her hands clammy as she waited for the inevitable. Jessie was home. The door creaked open, and there she stood, looking disheveled and worn, her eyes wide with surprise. "Jessie," Mia started, her voice barely a whisper. But Jessie didn't look surprised for long. Her eyes darted from Mia to the laundry basket, then back to Mia again. For a moment there was only silence, thick and suffocating. Jessie's face paled, and for the first time Mia saw a crack in her usual composure. Something deep within Jessie shifted her expression, her posture. Everything about her changed in an instant. Mia stood frozen, staring at her roommate. It was in that moment that she realized whatever happened next, this was no longer just about a tragedy. It was about a mystery that Jessie was somehow connected to, and Mia was standing at the center of it. The truth was coming, whether she was ready for it or not. Jessie's eyes remained locked on Mia, her gaze hard and unreadable, as if she were calculating the situation. The room felt heavy with the unspoken words between them. For a moment, Mia thought she might collapse under the weight of the silence. She waited for Jessie to speak, to offer some kind of explanation, but nothing came. The seconds stretched out into an eternity as the tension in the room grew thicker. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator, as though the world around them had quieted in anticipation of what would happen next. Jessie finally broke the silence, but her voice was low and controlled, almost as though she were speaking to herself. "What happened?" she asked, her eyes flicking from the laundry basket back to Mia. "What did you do?" Mia's throat tightened, and she swallowed hard. "I didn't do anything," she replied, the words barely escaping her lips. "I found the baby in the laundry basket, Jessie. What is going on?" For a brief moment, Jessie's expression flickered with something like panic, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. She took a step forward, her body stiff, and Mia instinctively stepped back. The room seemed to shrink between them. Jessie's presence, which had always been a quiet, comforting part of their shared space, now felt like something foreign, even dangerous. "I don't know what you think you saw," Jessie said, her voice steady but cold. "But you need to stop. You don't understand." Mia recoiled slightly, her heart pounding in her chest. She felt a sharp pang of fear in her gut. "Stop. What do you mean, stop? Jessie, that baby, what happened to it? Where did it come from?" Jessie's eyes darted around the room, as if searching for an escape. But there was nowhere to run. Her hands twitched at her sides, her fingers flexing nervously. "It's not what you think. Please, just wait until we talk about this." Her voice trembled slightly now. But it wasn't from fear, it was from something else, something Mia couldn't identify. Mia's pulse quickened. "Talk about what? What are you hiding, Jessie?" The words spilled out of her, too fast, too desperate to be contained. "Why would you leave a dead baby in a laundry basket? What could possibly justify that?" Jessie flinched as if Mia's words had struck her like a physical blow. For a moment she seemed to collapse in on herself, her shoulders sagging, her face losing the hard edge it had carried moments before. "I didn't want this to happen," she whispered, almost to herself. "I didn't know what to do." Mia felt a surge of both frustration and confusion. "What do you mean? What happened to the baby, Jessie? You can't just leave me with this. You can't just walk in here like everything is fine after what I found." Jessie took a shaky breath, and for the first time Mia saw her roommate's composure crack. Tears welled in her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away, almost as if she were ashamed of showing any emotion. She shook her head as if she couldn't quite believe what had happened. "I didn't mean to," she began, but her voice faltered. "Didn't mean to," what Mia demanded, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "What did you do, Jessie?" There was a long pause before Jessie spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was an accident. I didn't know what to do when I found out. When I found out I was pregnant, I was terrified. I didn't want anyone to know. I didn't want to deal with it." Her voice broke, and for the first time Mia saw the guilt and fear that had been buried beneath Jessie's cold exterior. Mia's breath caught in her throat as the truth began to take shape. You didn't tell anyone?" she asked, her voice shaking. Jessie's face crumpled, and she nodded, looking down at the floor. "I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to raise a baby. I didn't want to be a mother, and when I gave birth, I didn't know how to take care of it. I couldn't let anyone know what had happened." She choked back a sob, struggling to breathe. "I couldn't let anyone know that I was the one who—" Mia's mind reeled as she pieced it all together. The baby, the silence, Jessie's strange behavior. It all made sense now, but it didn't make it any easier to understand. The horror of the situation hit her with full force, and she felt sick to her stomach. Jessie had been hiding this secret, living with the weight of it, all while pretending everything was fine. "I didn't mean for it to happen like this," Jessie said, her voice barely audible, as if she were speaking more to herself than to Mia. "I didn't know how to fix it." Mia stood frozen, unable to speak, as the enormity of what had just been revealed sank in. The reality of it, the truth, was more terrifying than she could have ever imagined, and she knew, deep down, that things were about to get even worse. Mia stood motionless, staring at her roommate as the gravity of Jessie's confession settled over her like a thick fog. The words hung in the air, unspoken but understood, each one a shattering piece of a nightmare Mia never could have imagined. A dead baby. A secret so dark and twisted that it made everything in the apartment feel foreign, like she was no longer living in the same world. Jessie's face was pale, her eyes red and swollen, her expression lost and defeated. "I didn't know what to do," Jessie repeated, almost pleading, as if saying it over and over could make it true, could make the horror of the situation disappear. But it didn't. It only made the silence in the room more suffocating. Mia's hands were trembling, and her chest felt tight as she tried to process what was happening, to make sense of it all. Jessie's voice wavered again, breaking the silence. "I was scared. I didn't want anyone to know. I thought if I just kept it hidden, maybe it would go away. Maybe I could just forget about it. Mia's mind was spinning, unable to focus on anything other than the enormity of the truth she was now facing. Jessie had been living with this secret for how long? She had been hiding a pregnancy, hiding a child, hiding a tragedy. But why? What could have driven her to keep it all in the shadows, to carry the weight of such a horrifying act alone? "Why didn't you get help?" Mia's voice cracked as she asked, the words rushing out before she could stop them. "Why didn't you tell me? You could have gone to a hospital. You could have." "I didn't know what else to do," Jessie interrupted, her eyes wild with panic now. She took a step back, her hands raised as if trying to ward off Mia's accusations. "You don't understand. I thought if I just kept it quiet, I could move on. I thought I could just pretend it didn't happen." Her voice broke into a sob, the tears spilling down her cheeks now, unstoppable. "But I couldn't. I couldn't. I thought if I left it, if I just left the baby there, maybe it would be easier. Maybe it would be over." Mia's stomach churned as she processed the enormity of what Jessie had just said. The baby wasn't just forgotten, it had been abandoned, left in a laundry basket, as if it were nothing more than a piece of discarded clothing. The thought made Mia's skin crawl. How could anyone, even in a moment of panic, do something so horrific? A faint sound of sirens pierced the silence, growing louder by the second. The police were nearing the apartment, and Mia knew the moment of truth was coming. She knew that whatever happened next would change everything. There was no going back from this. Jessie had crossed a line, and no amount of pleading or explanation could undo the damage. The police would come in, they would ask questions, and the reality of Jessie's actions would be laid bare. The baby, the tragic loss, the lies, everything would come crashing down on them both. Jessie's eyes darted toward the door, and for the first time Mia saw a flicker of panic in her roommate's face. Jessie was realizing the same thing Mia had. The police were coming, and they wouldn't be able to hide the truth any longer. "No," Jessie whispered, shaking her head as if trying to convince herself that she could still escape the inevitable. "I didn't mean it. Please, Mia, please don't let them in. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." Mia's heart twisted, but she couldn't help her next words. "You can't undo what's been done, Jessie. It's over." Jessie's face crumpled as she fell to her knees, her hands covering her face. "I didn't know what else to do," she repeated, her voice muffled by her hands. The sirens grew louder, closer. Mia glanced toward the door, then back at Jessie. She could see the fear in her roommate's eyes, the desperate need for something, anything, to make this all go away. But there was no escaping it now. The truth had already come to light, and the consequences would follow. As the doorbell rang, Mia felt a wave of nausea wash over her. She didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was certain: her life, her trust in Jessie, and the world she had once known were shattered beyond repair. She walked toward the door slowly, her mind still reeling from the events of the past few hours. She didn't want to open it. She didn't want to face what was coming. But she knew she had no choice. The truth had a way of breaking everything in its path, and now there was no turning back.